England, 1841. London society had spoken its final judgment upon Lady Beatrice Haraway with the cold finality of a tomb being sealed. The daughter of the late Viscount Haraway had committed the unpardonable sin of loving where she ought not, and for this transgression she would be erased from the glittering world that had once celebrated her beauty and grace. The whispers had begun in the drawing-rooms of Mayfair, spread through the ballrooms of Belgravia, and finally reached the ears of her uncle, the current Viscount, who had wasted no time in arranging her exile to the remote convent of St. Catherine in the wind-swept moors of Northumberland. Arthur Clarence Ravensdale, Duke of Thornfield, stood at the window of his London residence, his tall frame silhouetted against the grey morning light that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains. His dark hair, slightly dishevelled from a sleepless night, fell across his broad forehead as he clutched the letter that had arrived at dawn. The words swam before his eyes, each syllable a dagger to his heart. Lady Beatrice Haraway had been sent away, removed from society, banished to a life of prayer and penance for the crime of having allowed herself to be seen in his company without proper chaperoning on 3 occasions. 3 occasions. 3 stolen moments of conversation in a garden. 3 instances of laughter shared over a volume of poetry. 3 times when their eyes had met across a crowded room and the entire universe had seemed to contract to that single point of connection. For these innocent transgressions, she had been condemned, and Arthur knew with bitter certainty that the true fault lay not with Beatrice, but with him. He was a duke, possessed of wealth and title that placed him beyond the reach of scandal, while she was merely the orphaned niece of a man who viewed her as little more than a burden to be managed. The injustice of it burned through his veins like molten iron, transforming his grief into something harder and more dangerous. He thought of the last time he had seen her, at the Duchess of Marlborough's ball 3 weeks past. She had worn a gown of pale blue silk that brought out the extraordinary colour of her eyes, those remarkable eyes that seemed to shift between grey and green, depending upon the light and her mood. Her chestnut hair had been arranged in elegant curls, and when she had turned to look at him across the ballroom, he had seen in her expression a mirror of his own longing. They had not danced that evening, propriety and her uncle's watchful glare preventing even that innocent contact, but Arthur had memorized every detail of her face, never imagining it would be the last time he would see her in society. The Ton had been merciless in their judgment. Lady Caroline Pembroke, that vicious harbinger of gossip, had been the first to speak openly of Lady Beatrice's supposed indiscretion. The fact that Arthur remained unmarried at the age of 30, despite being one of the most eligible bachelors in England, had only added fuel to the flames. Surely, the gossips whispered, if the Duke of Thornfield was seen speaking privately with Lady Beatrice on multiple occasions, there must be some understanding between them. And if there was no formal announcement, then the lady must have been forward, must have thrown herself at him in an unseemly manner. The logic was as circular as it was cruel, and Arthur had watched helplessly as Beatrice's reputation had been shredded by women who had never exchanged more than perfunctory pleasantries with her. The truth was far simpler and far more profound than anything the gossips could have imagined. Arthur Ravensdale had fallen in love with Lady Beatrice Haraway the moment she had contradicted him during a discussion of Byron's poetry at a literary salon 6 months earlier. She had argued, with passion and intelligence, that Byron's heroes were not romantic figures to be admired, but cautionary tales of pride and isolation. Her cheeks had flushed with the intensity of her conviction, and her eyes had flashed with a fire that had captured Arthur's attention completely. He, who had been surrounded by simpering debutantes and calculating mammas his entire adult life, had finally met a woman who spoke her mind without artifice or calculation. Their subsequent encounters had been entirely proper by any reasonable standard, but the Ton operated on suspicion rather than evidence. Arthur had sought her out at social gatherings, engaging her in conversation about literature, art, and philosophy. He had lent her a volume of Wordsworth from his personal library, and she had returned it with a handwritten note analyzing the poet's treatment of nature and memory. These small intimacies, innocent as they were, had been observed and reported, twisted by malicious tongues into something sordid. Arthur's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, had counselled caution. She had reminded him that his position required careful consideration of any potential alliance, that the choice of a duchess was a matter of political and social consequence. But Arthur had seen in his mother's eyes a wistfulness that spoke of her own arranged marriage, her own sacrifice of personal happiness for the sake of duty. His father had been a cold man, more concerned with the management of his estates than with the woman who shared his name and bore his children. Arthur had sworn even as a young man that he would not repeat that mistake. Now, as he stood in his study with the letter crumpling in his fist, Arthur made a decision that would scandalize society even more thoroughly than any whispered gossip. He would go to Northumberland. He would find the convent of St. Catherine. And he would bring Beatrice home regardless of the cost to his reputation or standing. The rules that governed the ton, the invisible chains of propriety and expectation that bound every action and word, suddenly seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. What value had his title, his wealth, his position, if he could not protect the woman he loved from unjust persecution? His secretary, Mr. Pemberton, entered the study with his usual quiet efficiency, but stopped short upon seeing his employer's expression. The Duke's face, normally composed in the aristocratic mask expected of his station, was transformed by raw emotion. His grey eyes, which could be as cold as winter steel when conducting business, now burned with fierce determination. "Your Grace, I have the correspondence you requested regarding the northern estates," Pemberton began, but Arthur cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Cancel all my engagements for the next fortnight, Pemberton. I am leaving for Northumberland within the hour. Have my travelling coach prepared, and send word to the staff at Ravensdale Hall that I shall require the house opened and ready for guests." Pemberton, who had served the Ravensdale family for 20 years and prided himself on never displaying surprise, could not entirely hide his astonishment. "Northumberland, Your Grace, but the season is at its height, and you are expected at the Duke of Wellington's dinner party this evening. The Prime Minister himself will be in attendance." "Then the Prime Minister shall have to endure my absence," Arthur replied, his tone brooking no argument. "This matter is of far greater importance than any political gathering. I trust you to manage any questions that arise regarding my sudden departure." The secretary recognized the finality in his employer's voice and bowed. "Of course, Your Grace. Might I inquire as to the nature of this urgent business? Should you require any particular documents or preparations?" Arthur hesitated, then decided that Pemberton's discretion had been proven over many years. "I am going to retrieve a lady who has been unjustly exiled from society. I intend to make amends for the harm that has been done to her reputation, even if that requires challenging every convention our world holds dear." Pemberton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then I shall ensure that Ravensdale Hall is prepared to receive a lady of quality, Your Grace. And might I say, it is about time you put happiness before duty." The journey to Northumberland took 3 days of hard travel, the Duke's coach traversing the rutted roads of northern England with all possible speed. Arthur spent the hours rehearsing what he would say to Beatrice, imagining her reaction to his sudden appearance. Would she be angry at his presumption? Would she refuse to leave the convent, believing her reputation too damaged for any hope of restoration? Or would he see in her eyes the same love that had been evident in their stolen glances across crowded ballrooms? The countryside gradually transformed from the gentle hills and cultivated fields of the Midlands to the wild, wind-swept moors of the north. Arthur watched the landscape through the coach window, noting how the very air seemed different here, cleaner and sharper, untainted by the coal smoke and gossip of London. Stone walls divided fields where sheep grazed, and ancient standing stones marked places where pagan rituals had once been performed. This was a harder, older England, a place where the conventions of Mayfair seemed as distant and irrelevant as the court customs of a foreign land. The convent of St. Catherine sat atop a rocky outcropping that overlooked a valley carved by centuries of wind and water. The building itself was medieval, its grey stone walls thick enough to withstand both the elements and the turbulent history of the borderlands. A single road, barely more than a track, wound its way up the hillside to the convent gates. As Arthur's coach laboured up the incline, he caught his first glimpse of the place that had become Beatrice's prison. The gates were opened by an elderly nun whose weathered face suggested a lifetime of prayer and hardship. She regarded the ducal crest on the coach door with neither awe nor servility, merely the calm patience of one who has long since ceased to be impressed by worldly titles. "I am the Duke of Thornfield," Arthur announced as he stepped from the coach, his travel cloak billowing in the sharp wind. "I have come to speak with Lady Beatrice Harroway on a matter of utmost urgency." The nun's expression did not change. "This is a house of contemplation and prayer, Your Grace. We do not receive gentlemen callers regardless of their rank. The young ladies who reside here have been entrusted to our care for their spiritual edification, and we take that responsibility most seriously." Arthur had anticipated this obstacle. "Then I shall speak with your Mother Superior. This is not a social call, sister. I have travelled 3 days from London on business that concerns Lady Beatrice's welfare and future. Surely your vows of Christian charity extend to allowing me an audience with your abbess." The nun studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in the quality of his clothing, the earnestness of his manner, and something else that Arthur could not quite identify. Finally she nodded. "Wait here. I shall inquire if Mother Abigail will receive you." Arthur was shown into a small parlour that was as austere as everything else he had seen of the convent. The walls were whitewashed stone, unadorned save for a simple wooden cross. The furniture consisted of 2 straight-backed chairs and a small table, all of plain construction. A narrow window looked out over the valley, and Arthur moved to it instinctively, his restless energy unable to bear the confines of the small room. Somewhere within these walls, Beatrice was living a life utterly foreign to everything she had known. She who had sparkled in ballrooms, who had debated philosophy with some of London's finest minds, who had loved music and dancing and the theatre, was now confined to a routine of prayer and silence. The injustice of it made Arthur's hands clench into fists. Mother Abigail, when she finally appeared, was a woman of perhaps 60 years, with an intelligent face and eyes that seemed to see far more than Arthur was comfortable revealing. She moved with the quiet grace of long habit, her black robes rustling softly as she took the seat across from him. "Your Grace," she said, her voice cultured and educated, speaking to a background far removed from these Spartan surroundings. "Sister Margaret tells me you have come regarding Lady Beatrice Harroway. I must tell you at the outset that the lady's uncle, Viscount Harroway, has placed her in our care with explicit instructions that she is to have no contact with the outside world for a period of 1 year. We are bound to honour his wishes as her legal guardian." Arthur leaned forward, his intensity evident in every line of his body. "Mother Abigail, I have come to make amends for the harm that has been done to Lady Beatrice. The scandal that resulted in her exile was the consequence of innocent conversations between us, conversations that were twisted by malicious gossip into something improper. I cannot in good conscience allow her to suffer punishment for what was, at worst, a minor breach of etiquette, and at best the natural interaction between 2 people of similar minds and interests." The abbess regarded him steadily. "And what form would these amends take, Your Grace? Do you propose to restore her reputation through some public gesture, to challenge those who spoke ill of her, or perhaps," and here her voice took on a knowing quality, "you have come to offer her the protection of your name?" Arthur met her gaze without flinching. "I have come to offer her my heart, Mother Abigail, and with it my name, my title, and everything I possess. I love Lady Beatrice Harroway with a depth of feeling I did not know myself capable of experiencing. I fully intend to make her my Duchess, if she will have me, and to devil with anyone who dares question the propriety of our union." For the first time, Mother Abigail smiled, and Arthur saw in that expression a warmth that transformed her austere features. "There is honesty in your words, Your Grace, and passion. Both are qualities we see too rarely in men of your station. However, I must ask you to consider carefully what you are proposing. The scandal surrounding Lady Beatrice has not diminished in the 3 weeks since her arrival. Indeed, I have received letters from London informing me that the gossip has only intensified. Should you marry her now, you will be attaching yourself to that scandal. Your family, your peers, your position in society, all will be affected." "Then they will be affected," Arthur replied firmly. "I have spent my entire life meeting the expectations of others, fulfilling the duties of my position, conducting myself with the propriety demanded of a duke. For once I choose to act according to my own heart, rather than society's rules. If that makes me a scandal, then I embrace it gladly." Mother Abigail was silent for a moment, her fingers steepled before her in an attitude of contemplation. "Lady Beatrice has adapted to our life here with remarkable grace," she said finally. "She assists Sister Clare in teaching the village children their letters, and she has brought beauty to our chapel through her skill at embroidery. But I have seen the sadness in her eyes, the longing for a world she believes lost to her forever. She has not spoken of you directly, but I have heard her weeping in the night, and I have seen how her gaze turns southward whenever she walks in our gardens." Arthur felt his throat tighten at the image of Beatrice alone and weeping. "Then let me ease her sorrow, Mother Abigail. Allow me to speak with her, to tell her that she has not been forgotten, that there is still hope for happiness. If she refuses me, if she tells me she wishes to remain here, then I shall respect her decision. But I cannot leave without seeing her, without knowing that she understands the depth of my regard." The abbess rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out over the valley with an expression of deep thought. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "I was not always a nun, Your Grace. I was once engaged to be married to a young man I loved deeply, but my father discovered that my betrothed had no fortune beyond his good name and noble heart, and he forbade the match. I was sent to this convent much as Lady Beatrice was, to forget my unsuitable attachment. That was 40 years ago, and not a day has passed that I have not wondered what my life might have been had I possessed the courage to defy convention." She turned back to Arthur, and he saw in her eyes a mixture of regret and resolve. "I will allow you to see Lady Beatrice, Your Grace, though I risk the displeasure of Viscount Harroway in doing so. But I do this not for you, but for her. Every woman deserves the chance to choose her own destiny, even if that choice comes with consequences. I shall send for her now. You may speak with her in this room, and I shall ensure you are not disturbed." Arthur felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly unmanned him. "Thank you, Mother Abigail. Your kindness will not be forgotten." The abbess paused at the door. "See that you are worthy of her, Your Grace. Lady Beatrice is a rare soul, intelligent and compassionate, with a strength of character that many mistake for fragility. She deserves a man who will value her mind as well as her beauty, who will stand beside her as an equal, rather than expect her submission as a subject." "I am well aware of Lady Beatrice's extraordinary qualities," Arthur replied. "Indeed, it is precisely her strength and intelligence that have captured my heart so completely. I can only hope that I prove worthy of the gift she might bestow in accepting me." The minutes that passed after Mother Abigail's departure were perhaps the longest of Arthur's life. He paced the small room, alternately rehearsing and discarding speeches, his mind racing through 1,000 possible outcomes. What if Beatrice had come to hate him for the role he had played in her downfall? What if the weeks of isolation and prayer had convinced her that she was better off without the complications of love and society? What if she simply no longer felt the connection that had seemed so powerful during their brief encounters in London? The sound of approaching footsteps made his heart hammer against his ribs. The door opened, and Beatrice entered, her movements hesitant and uncertain. She wore the simple grey dress that was evidently the garb provided to ladies residing at the convent, and her chestnut hair was covered by a modest cap. But no amount of plain clothing could diminish her beauty or disguise the intelligence that shone in her eyes. Those eyes, grey-green and luminous, widened in shock as she recognized him. Her hand flew to her throat in an instinctive gesture of surprise, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Arthur drank in the sight of her, noting the slight shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way her fingers trembled as they clutched at her skirts, the pulse that beat rapidly at the base of her throat. "Your Grace," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "I cannot imagine what brings you to this remote place. Surely there must be some mistake, some urgent business regarding my uncle that requires my attention." Arthur crossed the room in 3 swift strides, stopping just short of the proper distance propriety demanded. He wanted desperately to take her hands in his, to erase the formal barrier of title and convention, but he restrained himself, knowing that she needed to understand his purpose before he presumed on any intimacy. "There is no mistake, Beatrice," he said, deliberately using her Christian name, watching her eyes widen further at the familiarity. "I have come 3 days through wind and weather for the sole purpose of seeing you, of speaking truths that should have been spoken months ago. I have come to beg your forgiveness for the pain my attention caused you, and to offer you a means of escape from this exile." Beatrice pressed her lips together, and Arthur saw her struggling to maintain her composure. When she spoke, her voice shook slightly despite her obvious effort at control. "You owe me no apology, Your Grace. The fault, if fault there was, lay in my own lack of discretion. I should have been more careful to observe the proprieties, more mindful of appearances. I allowed myself to enjoy our conversations too openly, to respond too enthusiastically to your interest in my opinions. My uncle was quite clear in explaining how my behavior reflected poorly upon my family's name." "Your uncle," Arthur said, unable to keep the contempt from his voice, "is a pompous fool who values appearances more than justice, convention more than compassion. You committed no sin, Beatrice, unless being intelligent and articulate is now considered unseemly in a woman. Our conversations were innocent, our conduct entirely proper. The only crime committed was by those who twisted innocent friendship into something sordid through their malicious gossip." She turned away from him, moving to the window where she stood looking out over the valley. The late afternoon light streamed through the narrow opening, illuminating her profile in gold and shadow. Arthur thought he had never seen anything more beautiful, more heartbreakingly lovely, than this woman standing alone in a shaft of sunlight. "Whether our conduct was proper is immaterial now," Beatrice said quietly. "My reputation is ruined beyond repair. No amount of protestation or defense can restore what has been lost. This is my life now, Arthur, this convent with its silence and prayers. In time, perhaps, I shall find peace here, shall learn to accept my fate with grace." The sound of his Christian name on her lips sent a thrill through Arthur, despite the sadness of her words. It was the first time she had addressed him so informally, and he took it as a sign that the rigid barriers between them were beginning to crack. "I refuse to accept that this is your fate," he declared, closing the distance between them until he stood just behind her, close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender from her hair. "I have not travelled across England to stand by helplessly while you resign yourself to a half-life of isolation. Beatrice, look at me, please." She turned slowly, and when her eyes met his, Arthur saw that they were bright with unshed tears. The sight of her distress was nearly his undoing, but he forced himself to continue, to speak the words that had been burning in his heart since the moment he had received the letter announcing her exile. "I love you," he said simply, the 3 words carrying more weight and meaning than any elaborate declaration. "I have loved you since the evening you argued so passionately about Byron, since the afternoon you laughed at my pretensions regarding Italian painting, since every moment I have been privileged to spend in your company. I love your mind, your spirit, your courage, and your kindness. I love the way you think, the way you speak, the way you see the world with such clarity and compassion." Beatrice's breath caught audibly, and a single tear escaped to trace a path down her cheek. "Arthur, you must not say such things. Whatever affection existed between us, it is impossible now. You are a duke, expected to marry someone of impeccable breeding and untarnished reputation. I am a ruined woman, exiled from society, with nothing to offer but scandal and shame." "You offer me everything I have ever wanted," Arthur countered fiercely. "Love, companionship, intellectual partnership, genuine connection. These are worth more than all the impeccable breeding and spotless reputations in England. Marry me, Beatrice, become my duchess, and together we shall face down every gossip and critic. I have wealth enough to be independent of society's approval, position enough to weather any scandal. What I cannot weather is a lifetime without you." She stared at him in disbelief, her hand pressed to her heart as if to contain its wild beating. "You would marry me, knowing what it would cost you? The censure of your peers, the disappointment of your family, the whispers that would follow us wherever we went." "I would marry you tomorrow if you would have me," Arthur replied, and then, throwing caution entirely to the wind, he dropped to one knee before her, taking her hand in his, despite the breach of propriety such contact represented. Beatrice Harroway, you are the finest woman I have ever known. Your exile has been a source of torment to me, knowing that my attention was the cause of your suffering. Allow me to transform that suffering into joy. Say that you will be my wife, and I swear upon everything I hold sacred that I shall spend the rest of my days proving myself worthy of the gift." Beatrice looked down at him, her free hand covering her mouth as tears flowed freely now. "But Arthur, the world will say I trapped you, that I maneuvered you into offering for me. They will claim I planned this scandal to secure a duke for a husband. Let them say what they will," Arthur said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know the truth, and you know the truth. That is all that matters. The opinion of those who would speak such lies is worth nothing to me. My mother will welcome you, I promise you that. She has long wished for me to marry for love rather than duty. My friends, those whose good opinion I value, will judge you on your own merits. As for the rest, they may think what they please. I am done living my life according to the dictates of people I do not even respect." She was silent for a long moment, her grey-green eyes searching his face as if seeking some hidden doubt or reservation. Arthur met her gaze steadily, letting her see everything he felt, holding nothing back. He knew he was asking her to take an enormous risk, to trust him with her future when he had already been the inadvertent cause of her exile. But he also knew with absolute certainty that they belonged together, that what existed between them was rare and precious enough to justify any sacrifice. "I love you, Arthur," Beatrice finally whispered, the words emerging like a confession and a benediction. "I have loved you for months, though I dared not acknowledge it even to myself. When you spoke to me at those gatherings, when you listened to my opinions as if they mattered, when you looked at me as though you saw not just a potential bride but a human being of value, I felt truly seen for the first time in my life. But I am afraid of the scandal, afraid of damaging you, afraid that you will come to regret this decision." Arthur rose to his feet, still holding her hand, and with his free hand he gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I will never regret choosing you, Beatrice. You are the answer to questions I did not even know I was asking. As for scandal, we shall weather it together. I am the Duke of Thornfield. I have influence, resources, and a name that goes back centuries. We shall use all of those advantages to rebuild your reputation and to show society that their judgment was both premature and unjust." "How can you be so certain?" she asked, though Arthur could hear in her voice that she was beginning to believe, beginning to hope. "Because I know the power of truth and persistence," he replied. "Because I have spent my entire life navigating the treacherous waters of the Ton, and I understand how quickly yesterday's scandal becomes tomorrow's forgotten gossip. But most of all, because I have found something worth fighting for. You, Beatrice. Us. The life we could build together. That is worth any amount of difficulty or disapproval." She looked up at him, her expression transforming from doubt to determination. "Then yes, Arthur. Yes, I will marry you. And may God have mercy on us both, for we are about to give society enough material for gossip to last a decade." Arthur felt joy surge through him so powerfully that he laughed aloud, a sound of pure happiness that echoed in the small room. "Let them talk until their voices give out. I care not one whit for their opinions. All I care about is that you have agreed to be mine and I yours from this day forward." Without thinking of propriety or consequence, Arthur pulled Beatrice into his arms, holding her close as she wrapped her arms around his neck. They stood together in that embrace for a long moment, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over convention and courage over fear. When they finally separated, both were smiling through their tears. Arthur reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box that he had carried with him from London. Inside was a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a beautiful piece featuring a square-cut emerald surrounded by diamonds. The green of the stone exactly matched the color Beatrice's eyes took on when she was particularly passionate or excited. "This ring has waited for the right woman for 20 years, Arthur said as he slipped it onto Beatrice's finger. "My grandmother told me before she passed that I should give it only to someone who had both beauty and substance, someone who would be a true partner and not merely an ornament. I believe she would have adored you. Beatrice gazed at the ring, turning her hand to watch the gems catch the light. "It is exquisite, Arthur, and the responsibility that comes with it is not lost on me. I shall endeavor to be worthy of your grandmother's legacy and of the name I am to assume." "You are already worthy," Arthur assured her. "Now we must make plans. I shall speak with Mother Abigail and arrange for your immediate departure from this place. We shall travel to Ravensdale Hall, my estate in Northumberland, where we can be married quietly in the family chapel. After that, we shall present ourselves in London as a united front. Your uncle may bluster and object, but he has no legal standing once you are of age and married. And you are 21, are you not?" "I shall be 21 in 3 weeks' time," Beatrice confirmed. "But Arthur, should we not wait until after my birthday? My uncle could cause difficulties if we proceed before I am legally independent." Arthur's jaw tightened at the mention of the Viscount. "Your uncle has caused quite enough difficulties already. But you are right that we should proceed carefully. Very well, we shall spend the next 3 weeks at Ravensdale Hall, properly chaperoned by my mother, whom I shall send for immediately. On the day of your birthday, we shall be married, and by the time your uncle learns of it, the deed will be accomplished and there will be nothing he can do to prevent it." "You have thought of everything," Beatrice marveled. "But will your mother truly welcome me? She does not know me, and all she will have heard are the scandalous rumors." "My mother has longed to see me happy for years," Arthur said confidently. "She married for duty and position, and while she never complained, I could see the emptiness in her life. She will recognize in us what she never had with my father, and she will be overjoyed. Trust me in this, Beatrice. Mother Abigail has already agreed to allow your departure once I explained my intentions. All that remains is for you to gather your belongings and say your farewells to this place." Beatrice took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders in a gesture of determination that Arthur found utterly charming. "Then let us begin. The sooner we leave this convent, the sooner we can start our life together." The journey back to Ravensdale Hall was far different from Arthur's anxious trip north. With Beatrice seated beside him in the coach, wrapped in a warm cloak he had insisted on purchasing at the village at the base of the convent hill, the world seemed brighter and full of possibility. They talked for hours, making up for the months of forced silence, discussing everything from their favorite books to their hopes for the future. Arthur told her about Ravensdale Hall, describing the ancient manor house with its sprawling gardens and extensive library. He spoke of the tenants who lived on his lands, the improvements he had been making to their cottages, the school he had established for their children. Beatrice listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions and offering suggestions that revealed her own thoughtful nature. For her part, Beatrice shared memories of her childhood before her parents' passing, when life had been filled with laughter and love. She spoke of her mother, who had been an accomplished musician, and her father, who had encouraged her intellectual curiosity even when society frowned upon educated women. The pain of their loss was evident in her voice, but so too was the joy of remembering them. "They would have approved of you," she said softly as the coach rattled over a particularly rough section of road. "My father always said I should marry a man who could challenge me intellectually, who would appreciate my mind rather than merely tolerating it. And my mother insisted that love was more important than any amount of money or status." "Then I shall have to live up to their expectations," Arthur replied, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. The gesture was tender and respectful, yet it sent a thrill through both of them that spoke of deeper intimacies to come. They spent the first night at a respectable inn, with Beatrice carefully ensconced in a private room under the watchful eye of the innkeeper's wife, whom Arthur had generously compensated to serve as chaperone. Arthur spent a sleepless night in his own chamber, alternating between euphoria at Beatrice's acceptance and anxiety about the challenges that lay ahead. He penned a long letter to his mother, explaining the situation in detail and begging her to come to Ravensdale Hall with all possible speed. He knew the Dowager Duchess would have questions and concerns, but he trusted in her love for him and her own romantic nature to win the day. Ravensdale Hall exceeded even Arthur's descriptions. The ancient house, built of honey-coloured stone, stood in the midst of parkland that stretched for miles in every direction. The formal gardens were beginning to show the first hints of spring, with crocuses pushing up through the last patches of snow. The house itself was a harmonious blend of Tudor and Georgian architecture, with mullioned windows and elegant columns coexisting in surprising unity. The staff, alerted by Arthur's letter, had prepared the house for the reception of its master and his unexpected guest. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, was a woman of mature years and impeccable discretion, who welcomed Beatrice with warmth that spoke well of Arthur's character as an employer. The best guest suite, a series of interconnected rooms with views over the gardens, had been aired and furnished with fresh flowers and every possible comfort. "It is beautiful," Beatrice breathed as she stood at the window of her sitting room, looking out over the landscape. "I had not imagined such tranquility existed anywhere in England." Arthur, who had followed her into the room despite propriety suggesting he should remain in the hallway, moved to stand beside her. "This is to be your home, Beatrice. These lands, this house, all of it will be yours as much as mine. I want you to be happy here." She turned to him with a smile that transformed her face. "I shall be happy wherever you are, Arthur. The house is magnificent, but it is your presence that makes it feel like home." The Dowager Duchess arrived 2 days later, travelling in her own coach with her lady's maid and a mountain of luggage. Arthur waited anxiously in the entrance hall, with Beatrice standing nervously at his side. He had assured her repeatedly that his mother would welcome her, but he could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that she would be judged and found wanting. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield was a tall, elegant woman in her late 50s, with silver hair and the same grey eyes that Arthur had inherited. She swept into the entrance hall with the bearing of one accustomed to command, her travelling cloak billowing behind her. Arthur felt Beatrice tense beside him, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping forward to greet his mother. "Mother, thank you for coming with such haste. I know the journey must have been tiresome, but your presence here means everything to me." The Dowager Duchess embraced her son briefly, then turned her penetrating gaze upon Beatrice. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she studied the young woman standing before her, taking in every detail from the simple gown to the nervous clasping of hands. Beatrice, to her credit, met the Duchess's scrutiny with quiet dignity, neither cowering nor displaying false bravado. "So you are Lady Beatrice Haraway," the Dowager Duchess said at last, her voice giving nothing away. "The young woman who has caused such upheaval in London society, and more importantly, who has captured my son's heart so completely that he has abandoned the season to rush to Northumberland." "Your Grace, I am sensible of the irregularity of this situation," Beatrice began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "I can only assure you that I never intended to cause any scandal or difficulty for your son. My regard for him is sincere, and I shall endeavour to be worthy of the honour he has bestowed upon me by asking for my hand." The Dowager Duchess continued to study her for another long moment. Then, to Arthur's immense relief, her stern expression softened into a smile. "My dear child, any woman who can inspire my son to act with such decisive passion, to throw caution to the wind and follow his heart, has already proven her worth. Arthur has spent his entire life being dutiful, responsible, and proper. It is high time he did something impulsive for love." She stepped forward and took both of Beatrice's hands in hers. "Welcome to our family, my dear. I have read Arthur's letter most carefully, and I understand the circumstances that led to your exile. Society can be unutterably cruel, particularly to women who dare to be intelligent and independent. But we Ravensdales have weathered scandals before, and we shall weather this one. The important thing is that you and Arthur are united in your feelings for one another." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Your Grace. Your acceptance means more than I can adequately express. I promise you shall not regret extending your kindness to me." "None of this Your Grace nonsense," the Dowager Duchess declared warmly. "You shall call me Mother Catherine, or simply Mother if you prefer, as you are to be my daughter. Now, Arthur, you may release Lady Beatrice from your vigilant watch and allow me to become better acquainted with her. We ladies have much to discuss, including the details of a wedding that must be arranged with both speed and dignity." Over the following days, Ravensdale Hall became a hive of activity as preparations for the wedding commenced in earnest. The Dowager Duchess, despite her acceptance of the unconventional circumstances, insisted that propriety be observed as much as possible. Beatrice and Arthur were not permitted to be alone together, though they managed to steal moments in the library and during walks in the garden, always with a maid or footman hovering at a discreet distance. Mother Catherine, as Beatrice had begun to call her, proved to be an invaluable ally. She took charge of ordering Beatrice's trousseau, using her own modiste who travelled from London with trunks full of fabrics and patterns. The wedding gown was to be an elegant creation of ivory silk, with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline, suitable for a chapel wedding, yet beautiful enough to serve as a statement of the bride's refinement and taste. "We must be strategic in our approach to society," Mother Catherine explained one afternoon, as she and Beatrice sat in the morning room, reviewing guest lists and correspondence. "The wedding itself will be intimate, attended only by those we can trust to be supportive, but afterwards we shall host a grand ball at the London house, a celebration that will force society to acknowledge your marriage and your position as the Duchess of Thornfield. Those who attend will be seen as accepting the union, and those who refuse will mark themselves as churlish and spiteful." Beatrice marvelled at the older woman's tactical thinking. "You make it sound like a military campaign." "My dear, that is precisely what it is," Mother Catherine replied with a knowing smile. "Society is a battlefield, and we must choose our ground carefully. Arthur's position gives us tremendous advantages. There are many families who will swallow their reservations for the sake of maintaining favour with a duke, and once a few influential hostesses accept you, the rest will follow like sheep. Humans are remarkably predictable in their desire to be on the winning side." Arthur, meanwhile, was managing the legal and practical aspects of their impending marriage. He had sent word to Beatrice's uncle, the Viscount Harroway, informing him in the most formal terms possible that Lady Beatrice would be marrying the Duke of Thornfield on her 21st birthday. The letter had been crafted to give the Viscount no grounds for objection, while making it abundantly clear that his opinion on the matter was neither sought nor required. The response, when it came, was exactly what Arthur had expected. Viscount Harroway wrote in outraged tones about his niece's ingratitude, about the Duke's presumption in removing her from the convent without his permission, and about the scandal that would surely result from such a hasty marriage. The letter concluded with a barely veiled threat to contest the marriage on grounds that Beatrice had been manipulated or coerced. Arthur read the letter aloud to Beatrice and his mother over dinner, his voice dripping with disdain. "The man actually has the audacity to suggest that I have somehow compromised you into accepting my proposal, as if 3 weeks in a convent under the supervision of nuns could provide any opportunity for impropriety." "My uncle has always valued appearances over truth," Beatrice said quietly. "He was content to exile me to avoid scandal, but now that I am to marry a duke, he no doubt regrets his hasty decision. I suspect he had hoped to eventually arrange a marriage for me to some minor gentleman who would overlook my damaged reputation in exchange for my modest dowry." "Well, he has lost that opportunity," Arthur declared firmly, "and once we are married, he will have no claim over you whatsoever. I have instructed my solicitor to ensure that every legal detail is attended to properly. There will be no grounds for him to challenge the marriage, no matter how desperately he might wish to do so." As Beatrice's birthday approached, the atmosphere at Ravensdale Hall grew increasingly joyful. The house staff, who had quickly come to admire their future duchess for her kindness and lack of pretension, decorated the chapel with spring flowers and ribbons. The village church bells were to ring out in celebration, and Arthur had arranged for a feast to be provided to all his tenants in honor of the occasion. The night before her birthday, Beatrice stood once again at the window of her sitting room, looking out over the moonlit gardens. She heard a soft knock at her door and called permission to enter, expecting her maid. Instead, Mother Catherine appeared, wrapped in a dressing gown and carrying a small wooden box. "I thought you might be unable to sleep," the Dowager Duchess said gently. "I know I could not rest easy the night before my own wedding. May I sit with you for a moment?" "Of course," Beatrice replied, gesturing to the chairs by the fireplace, "though I confess I am surprised you wish to spend time with me so late in the evening. Surely you must be exhausted from all the preparations." Mother Catherine settled into her chair with a sigh of contentment. "My dear child, I have been looking forward to this conversation. You see, I have something I wish to give you, and something I wish to tell you, and both are best done in private." She opened the wooden box to reveal a stunning necklace of pearls interspersed with sapphires. The gems glowed in the firelight, clearly pieces of significant age and value. "This necklace belonged to Arthur's grandmother, the woman whose ring you now wear. She gave it to me on the day I married Arthur's father, along with some advice that I have never forgotten." Beatrice leaned forward, captivated by both the beauty of the jewelry and the emotion in Mother Catherine's voice. "What did she tell you?" "She said that marriage to a duke was both a privilege and a challenge, that I would be expected to fulfill certain roles and maintain certain standards, but that I must never lose myself in the process. She told me that the secret to happiness was to remember that I was not just a duchess, but a woman with my own thoughts, feelings, and dreams. And she made me promise that if I ever had the opportunity to advise another young woman entering this family, I would pass along her wisdom." Mother Catherine fastened the necklace around Beatrice's neck, her fingers gentle and practiced. "Arthur's father was a good man in his way, but he was raised to believe that emotion was weakness and that duty was everything. Our marriage was cordial and respectful, but it lacked the warmth and passion that I had hoped for. I do not tell you this to sadden you, but to explain why I am so delighted by your union with Arthur. My son loves you, truly loves you, in a way his father never learned to love anyone. He sees you as his equal, values your mind and spirit as much as your beauty. That is a rare and precious thing, Beatrice. Promise me that you will nurture that love, that you will never allow the demands of society or the weight of your position to diminish what you share." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes as she touched the necklace at her throat. "I promise, Mother Catherine. Arthur has given me a second chance at happiness when I thought my life was over. I shall treasure him and our love every day we are blessed to share together." The Dowager Duchess embraced her warmly. "Then I shall sleep easy knowing that my son has found the partner he deserves. Now you must rest, for tomorrow is a momentous day. You shall wake as Lady Beatrice Haraway and go to sleep as the Duchess of Thornfield. That transformation, while merely a matter of words and ceremony, will change your life in ways both wonderful and challenging." The morning of Beatrice's 21st birthday dawned clear and bright, with spring sunshine flooding through the windows of Ravensdale Hall. Beatrice was awakened early by her maid, who brought breakfast on a tray along with a note from Arthur. The message was brief but heartfelt, expressing his love and anticipation for the ceremony to come. The morning passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice was bathed, dressed, and coiffed for her wedding. The ivory silk gown fit perfectly, and with Mother Catherine's sapphire and pearl necklace and Arthur's grandmother's ring, she looked every inch a duchess. Her chestnut hair had been arranged in an elegant style that allowed several curls to frame her face, and a simple coronet of fresh flowers completed the ensemble. When she finally stood before the mirror in her chamber, Beatrice barely recognized herself. The frightened young woman who had been sent to a convent in disgrace had been transformed into a bride, radiant with happiness and confidence. She touched the necklace at her throat, remembering Mother Catherine's words and drawing strength from them. The chapel at Ravensdale Hall was intimate and beautiful, its ancient stones having witnessed centuries of Ravensdale family ceremonies. Candles flickered in wall sconces, and the spring flowers that decorated every surface filled the air with delicate fragrance. The vicar from the village church stood before the altar, his weathered face wreathed in smiles, for he had known Arthur since boyhood and was delighted to see him finally taking a bride. The small gathering of witnesses included Mother Catherine, several trusted servants, and two of Arthur's closest friends who had travelled from London upon receiving his urgent summons. Lord Christopher Winthrop and his sister, Lady Margaret, had known Arthur since childhood, and both had expressed nothing but happiness at his choice of bride. As the organ began to play, Beatrice walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Pemberton, Arthur's secretary, who had graciously agreed to give her away in the absence of any male relative willing to perform the office. Her eyes, however, were fixed entirely on Arthur, who stood waiting for her at the altar. He was magnificent in his formal attire, his dark hair carefully arranged, his grey eyes blazing with emotion as he watched her approach. Beatrice saw in his expression everything she needed to know, all the love and devotion and promise of happiness to come. When she reached his side and Mr. Pemberton placed her hand in Arthur's, she felt as though she had finally come home after a long and difficult journey. The ceremony itself was both simple and profound. The vicar spoke of love and commitment, of the sacred bond being formed between these two souls. When it came time for the vows, Arthur's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Beatrice for all the days of his life. Beatrice's own vows were spoken with equal conviction, her voice never wavering despite the tears of joy that threatened to overflow. The exchange of rings was perhaps the most moving moment. Arthur had commissioned a wedding band to complement his grandmother's engagement ring, a circle of gold etched with a delicate pattern of vines and flowers. As he slipped it onto Beatrice's finger, he whispered words meant for her ears alone. "With this ring, I give you my heart, my name, and my eternal devotion. You are my Duchess, my love, my everything." Beatrice's response, as she placed a plain gold band on Arthur's finger, was equally tender. "And I give you all that I am and all that I shall ever be. You have saved me from despair and given me a future brighter than any dream. I am yours, now and always." When the vicar finally pronounced them man and wife, Arthur pulled Beatrice into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made Mother Catherine laugh and the witnesses cheer. It was not the chaste, brief kiss typically exchanged in church ceremonies, but rather a kiss that spoke of deep love and anticipation of their life together. The wedding breakfast that followed was a joyous affair, with toasts offered by Lord Christopher and Lady Margaret, both of whom welcomed Beatrice into their circle with genuine warmth. Mother Catherine gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes, speaking of her son's journey to finding true love and her joy at gaining a daughter. Arthur, holding Beatrice's hand throughout the meal, seemed unable to stop smiling. He had faced down his fears, challenged convention, and won the greatest prize imaginable. The woman he loved was now his wife, and together they would build a life based on mutual respect, intellectual partnership, and abiding affection. As the afternoon wore on, and the guests departed to their various chambers to rest before dinner, Arthur and Beatrice finally found themselves alone in the small drawing-room that overlooked the gardens. Arthur pulled his wife, how wonderful it felt to think that word, into his arms and held her close. "We have done it, my darling Beatrice. You are the Duchess of Thornfield, and nothing and no one can ever take that away from you. The scandal, the gossip, your uncle's objections, all of it is rendered meaningless by the vows we spoke today." Beatrice rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I can scarcely believe this is real, Arthur. A month ago I was alone in a convent, believing my life was over. Now I am your wife with a future full of possibility. It feels like a dream from which I might wake at any moment." "Then let me assure you of its reality," Arthur murmured, tilting her chin up so he could gaze into her eyes. "I love you, Beatrice Ravensdale, Duchess of Thornfield. I love you with a depth and intensity that still amazes me, and I intend to spend every day of our marriage making certain you never doubt that love or your place at my side." He kissed her again, more gently this time, but no less meaningfully. Beatrice responded with matching tenderness, her arms wrapping around his neck as she gave herself over to the moment. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling. "Now comes the interesting part," Arthur said with a rueful grin. "We must return to London and face society as a married couple. Are you prepared for the battle ahead, my warrior Duchess?" "With you beside me, I am prepared for anything," Beatrice replied, with a confidence that surprised even herself. "Let them whisper and speculate. Let them judge and criticize. I am the Duchess of Thornfield, married to a man I love and who loves me in return. That is armor enough against any weapon society might wield." 2 weeks later, the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield made their entrance into London society at a grand ball hosted at Thornfield House in Grosvenor Square. The event had been planned with meticulous care by Mother Catherine, who understood exactly how to leverage the family's influence and connections. Invitations had been sent to every significant family in the ton, and refusal to attend would be seen as a direct snub to one of England's premier dukes. The ballroom at Thornfield House was magnificent, decorated with thousands of flowers and lit by enormous crystal chandeliers. An orchestra played in the gallery, and servants circulated with champagne and delicacies. The stage was set for Beatrice's reintroduction to society, and the ton had turned out in force, their curiosity overcoming any reservations about the scandal. Arthur and Beatrice received their guests at the entrance to the ballroom, presenting a united front of confidence and dignity. Beatrice wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, along with Mother Catherine's necklace and a diamond tiara that had belonged to Arthur's grandmother. She looked every inch a duchess, her bearing regal and her manner gracious. The whispers, of course, were inevitable. Beatrice could hear the susurrus of gossip that followed in their wake as they moved through the ballroom. But she held her head high, her hand resting lightly on Arthur's arm, and met every curious gaze with calm assurance. Arthur, for his part, was the picture of pride and devotion, introducing his duchess with unmistakable affection and making it clear that anyone who treated her with anything less than respect would answer to him. The turning point came when the Duchess of Marlborough, one of the ton's most influential hostesses, approached them with a warm smile. "Your Grace, Duke Arthur, how delightful to see you both. Lady Beatrice, or rather Duchess Beatrice, may I say that marriage clearly agrees with you. You look absolutely radiant." The Duchess's public approval was like a dam breaking. Suddenly, other guests felt emboldened to approach and offer their congratulations. Lady Caroline Pembroke, that vicious gossip who had been instrumental in spreading rumours about Beatrice, found herself increasingly isolated as former allies flocked to curry favour with the new Duchess. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Arthur led Beatrice onto the dance floor, and every eye in the ballroom watched as they moved together with perfect synchronicity. They spoke softly as they danced, their words intimate and private despite the public setting. "You are magnificent," Arthur whispered. "I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. Look how they watch you, how they scramble to gain your favour. You have already won, my darling." "We have won," Beatrice corrected gently. "This victory belongs to both of us, to our courage in choosing love over convention. But Arthur, I confess I am grateful for your presence beside me. Facing these people alone would have been infinitely more difficult." "You shall never have to face anything alone again," Arthur promised. "We are partners in all things, united against whatever challenges may come. That was my vow to you in the chapel at Ravensdale Hall, and I intend to honour it every day of our lives." As the evening progressed, Beatrice found herself surrounded by women eager to make her acquaintance. Several confessed in hushed tones their admiration for her courage in defying convention to marry for love. Young ladies looked at her with something approaching envy, while their mammas calculated furiously how they might secure similar advantageous matches for their own daughters. Lord Christopher Winthrop, dancing with Beatrice later in the evening, while Arthur spoke with political associates, expressed his delight at the evening's success. "You have carried the day splendidly, Your Grace. I dare say that by tomorrow morning the scandal will be entirely forgotten, replaced by a new narrative about the great romance between the Duke of Thornfield and his Duchess. Society does love a love story, particularly when it involves wealth, title, and a happy ending." "I hope you are correct, my lord," Beatrice replied, "though I confess that even if the gossip were to continue, it would matter less to me now. I have Arthur. I have a position that allows me to do genuine good in the world, and I have the respect of those whose opinions I value. The rest is merely noise." By the end of the evening, as the last guests departed, and Arthur and Beatrice finally found themselves alone in the drawing-room, both were exhausted but triumphant. Arthur pulled his wife into his arms, loosening her elaborate coiffure and pressing kisses to her temple. "It is done, my love. You have been officially accepted by society as the Duchess of Thornfield. Any remaining whispers will fade with time, and your reputation is restored. You are free to take your rightful place in the world." Beatrice looked up at him, with eyes that shone with love and gratitude. "I am free because of you, Arthur, because you had the courage to shatter every limit society placed upon us, to fight for our love, when it would have been easier to bow to convention. I shall spend the rest of my life being worthy of that sacrifice." "It was never a sacrifice," Arthur replied firmly. "Choosing you was the easiest decision I have ever made. You are my heart, Beatrice, my conscience, my joy. Everything I have, everything I am, is better because you are part of it. In the months and years that followed, the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield became known not just for their romantic story, but for their partnership in all things. Beatrice used her position to champion causes close to her heart, establishing schools for girls and supporting artists and writers. Arthur involved her in the management of his estates, valuing her insights and intelligence in all business matters. They had their challenges, certainly. Beatrice's uncle continued to send occasional letters filled with recriminations and demands, but Arthur ensured they never reached his wife's eyes. Lady Caroline Pembroke and her ilk continued to whisper their poison, but found their influence waning as Beatrice's genuine kindness and grace won over even the most hardened skeptics. The birth of their first child, a daughter they named Catherine after Arthur's mother, cemented Beatrice's place in society completely. The baby girl was celebrated across London, and her christening was attended by the highest ranks of the aristocracy. Arthur, who had been feared might prefer a male heir, openly doted on his daughter and announced that he hoped for many more children, regardless of their gender. Mother Catherine, watching her son and daughter-in-law navigate the challenges of marriage and parenthood, found a happiness she had never known in her own marriage. She became a devoted grandmother and a trusted advisor, her strategic mind helping to guide the younger couple through the occasional pitfalls of aristocratic life. As for Beatrice and Arthur, their love only deepened with time. They never forgot the difficult journey that had brought them together, the scandal and exile that had nearly separated them forever. But those trials had forged a bond that proved unbreakable, built on a foundation of mutual respect, intellectual companionship, and profound affection. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Arthur presented Beatrice with a portrait he had commissioned, depicting her not in the formal style typically reserved for duchesses, but in a more intimate setting. The painting showed her in the library at Ravensdale Hall, surrounded by books with sunshine streaming through the window and a smile of genuine happiness on her face. "This is how I see you," Arthur explained, as Beatrice gazed at the portrait with tears in her eyes. "Not as a duchess adorned in jewels and finery, though you wear those beautifully, but as the woman I love, the brilliant, compassionate, remarkable person who has made my life infinitely richer. I want this portrait to hang in our private sitting room, where I can see it every day and remember how blessed I am." Beatrice turned to embrace her husband, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Do you remember the day you came to the convent, Arthur? How terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. I thought I had been sent there to be forgotten, to fade away into obscurity. But instead, you shattered every limit that had been placed upon me. You gave me back not just my freedom, but my sense of worth and possibility." "You gave me far more," Arthur countered gently. "You taught me that love is worth any risk, that true partnership is worth more than all the approval society can offer. You showed me how to be brave enough to follow my heart, even when it meant defying every expectation placed upon me. We saved each other, my darling Beatrice, and we continue to do so every day." They stood together in their library, surrounded by the books they loved, in the house that had become their sanctuary, and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Society, which had once seemed so powerful and judgmental, had faded into the background. What mattered was the life they had built together, the love that sustained them, and the future that stretched before them full of promise. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy Beatrice had become merely a footnote in their story, a brief chapter in a much larger and more beautiful narrative. Those who had condemned her so readily had either been won over by her grace and character, or found themselves increasingly irrelevant as the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield's influence and popularity grew. History would remember them not for the scandal, but for the love story that transcended it. In an age when marriages were typically arranged for advantage, and affection was considered secondary at best, Arthur and Beatrice Ravensdale stood as an example of what was possible when two people had the courage to choose each other despite every obstacle. Their story became the stuff of legend, whispered by young ladies who dreamed of finding such love themselves, and by young gentlemen who aspired to Arthur's courage in defying convention. The convent of St. Catherine, which had been meant as Beatrice's tomb, became instead a symbol of the darkness before dawn, the trial that must be endured before happiness can be fully appreciated. And through it all, through every triumph and challenge, every joy and sorrow, Arthur and Beatrice remained united. They had shattered the limits that society sought to impose, had proven that love could indeed conquer scandal and fear, and had built a life together that was as fulfilling as it was unconventional. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask about the early days of their marriage, about the scandal and the exile and the dramatic rescue, Beatrice would smile and take Arthur's hand, and together they would tell the story. Not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of defying society, but as a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and the willingness to fight for what truly matters. The world will always have limits it tries to place upon us, Arthur would tell his grandchildren. Rules about who we can love, how we must behave, what we are allowed to dream, but those limits only have power if we grant it to them. Your grandmother and I learned that love, real love, is worth breaking any rule, defying any convention, enduring any scandal. And we learned that together, two people who truly love each other can overcome anything. Beatrice would add, her eyes still sparkling with the same intelligence and fire that had first captured Arthur's attention all those years ago. I was sent to that monastery to be forgotten, to have my spirit broken and my dreams extinguished. But your grandfather refused to allow that fate. He shattered every limit, every barrier, every convention that stood between us. And in doing so, he taught me the most important lesson of all, that we are only as imprisoned as we allow ourselves to be, and that true freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from the courage to choose our own path. As the sun set over Ravensdale Hall, casting golden light across the gardens where generations of Ravensdales had walked, Arthur and Beatrice would look at each other with the same love and devotion that had sustained them through every trial. They had been tested by scandal, separated by injustice, and challenged by society's disapproval. But they had emerged victorious, not because they were perfect, but because they had refused to give up on each other or on the possibility of happiness. Their story was a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories are born not in ease and comfort, but in adversity and struggle. That the truest test of devotion is not how we behave when everything is perfect, but how we fight for each other when everything seems lost. And that the limits society places upon us are only as strong as our willingness to accept them. In the end, Lady Beatrice Haraway had not been forgotten in that remote monastery. Instead, she had been transformed, refined by trial, and ultimately elevated to heights she could never have imagined. And Arthur Clarence Ravensdale, Duke of Thornfield, had proven that true nobility lies not in blindly following society's rules, but in having the courage to write one's own story, to choose love over convention, and to shatter every limit in pursuit of genuine happiness. Their love had scandalized London, defied convention, and ultimately transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who drew inspiration from their courage. They had shown that it was possible to be both aristocratic and authentic, to hold positions of power while remaining true to one's heart, and to build a marriage based on equality and mutual respect, even in an age that rarely valued such things. As night fell over Ravensdale Hall, and Arthur and Beatrice retired to their private chambers, they carried with them the knowledge that their love story would endure long after they were gone. It would be told and retold, inspiring future generations to believe in the possibility of true love, to fight for their own happiness, and to never accept the limits others try to impose. For they had proven beyond any doubt that love, when it is real and true and fought for with every ounce of courage one possesses, can indeed shatter all limits and triumph over every obstacle. And that is a lesson worth remembering, worth celebrating, and worth passing down through the generations. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale, with all our gratitude, echoes of romance.